Hi, I'm Jessie Herr. I was class of 1963. That's so last century. So today we're going to hear from some people who graduated in this century, and we're going to hear what they've been doing, how they got there, something about their Antioch experience. So we're going to do this in terms of the panel are as follows, and this is the order in which they're going to present. Mackenzie Bristow graduated 2021, and she is in Atlanta, Georgia. Wajid Caston, 2002, and she's in Port Angeles, Washington. Gary Bucchiarelli, 2002, he's in Los Angeles, California. Jack Matthews, 2015, he's in Pueblo, Colorado. Soleil Sykes, 2018, Washington, D.C., and Chris Welter, 2020, is right here in white Yellow Springs. So we'll have a briefish statement from each of them, and then we'll open it to Q&A. Okay, Mackenzie?
Greetings, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, first of all, thank you, Jessie, for all your hard work to pull us together and enable us to have this hybrid experience. And I just wanted to say hello from Atlanta, Georgia. As Jessie mentioned, I graduated in 2001, and even though it's closer, it still feels really far away. I'm currently a user experience instructor and researcher for the Home Depot, of all places. It's very Atlanta, Georgia centric. This has been a recent career change, and I guess I'm going to tell you quickly how I got there, but it's really because of Antioch in a lot of ways. What I mean by that is one thing that Antioch, I think, instilled in me, as well as many of us that will tell you today, is that it gives us this confidence and this desire to keep pushing ourselves, try new experiences, try new careers, because we know it not only enhances us, but it enhances our community. So previous to working in my current position, and I can answer questions about what that is, because user experience is a really new field. I was an applied linguist, and I still am an applied linguist. So I majored at Antioch in applied linguistics and dance. I had really strived towards being a performer up until Antioch, and then quickly shot out my knees. And so linguistics became the most obvious path forward. And Antioch had this really unique way of engaging students in their learning that included languages. You go into a classroom and they just start speaking to you, and you had to kind of survive. And quickly you realized you could speak and you could interact in new ways that you hadn't before. From there, I quickly transferred from Antioch, finishing and graduating, to Ohio University. There was an agreement at the time, and I did my master's in applied linguistics. This became kind of like a career where I was overseeing language programs, helping faculty living around the world. So I lived in Korea, I lived in Japan, I lived in Finland, and had a long career thinking about how we interact with the world and how language shapes our experiences. And just recently moved to, I thought that's the reason, I've been in Atlanta for about 7 years, but Emory University brought me to Atlanta. And there I was overseeing their graduate English as a second language program. And it was at that time I started my PhD in linguistics, and I had a big break between my master's and my PhD. And I think that's also something that Antioch gives you a bit of understanding that education doesn't have to happen back to back, and it doesn't have to always look the same way, and it doesn't always have to be traditional. So all that time I had between my master's and my PhD, I saw just as a big of a learning experience. And then, just like for all of us, the pandemic hit, and my understanding of how we learned to work with one another, how international folks found ways to travel between different countries really kind of fell apart. And I also saw how our higher education really struggled with how to manage technology. and how to engage one another over technological spaces. And so when this position opened up at Home Depot, where I was going to be able to essentially support technologists, I guess that's what we can call them, support technologists in thinking about how to better approach the experience of technology, integrating ethics and cultural knowledge, and try to bring a bit of humanity to the technology world, and then also to leverage my research skills that I had grown as a PhD student. I kind of jumped on it. And I remember a lot of people saying, how could you leave this huge career in applied linguistics? I rose up to the ranks, I was working at Emory, and I thought, you know, if you knew Antioch students, you wouldn't question that. So I think we remain flexible and adaptable and curious, and so that's kind of where I'm at now, and I guess I'm excited to pass it on to Waji. I think you're next.
Excuse me, is it possible to put on closed captioning?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Anyway, so I'm Waji Caston, formerly Waji Sanders. I got married and I have kids now. And so I graduated from Antioch with a bachelor's in chemistry, which I'm really proud of, and was a really great experience. And then after that, I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I worked in labs for a while. I did environmental chemistry with like testing and everything, which currently I'm in school again and I'm taking environmental health, so it's always interesting to have that background and how it applies to everything in the world. And then I did that for a while and I got kind of bored in the lab, and so I decided to go back to school, and I ended up at the National College of Natural Medicine, which is now the National University of Natural Medicine, and I have a doctorate in naturopathic medicine and acupuncture. And after that, I moved to Port Angeles, Washington, and I worked for the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe in their tribal health department. I've served as the medical director here, and I've led the community health program. And currently I am in the outpatient substance use disorder program as their physician, and I am getting my master's in public health at Johns Hopkins. I'm a Bloomberg fellow, and that means I have like a full scholarship to complete the program. And part of the reason, you know, my motivation for all this is, you know, making naturopathic medicine more accessible to Native people and also underserved people. I live in a rural area, so people don't necessarily have access to primary care. I am a primary care physician in the state of Washington, and I think that, you know, providing more culturally appropriate medicine to Native peoples is really important, as well as, you know, finding ways to address the opioid epidemic. So that's kind of most of my work. Antioch really provided that foundation of curiosity and basic science knowledge through, you know, the science department. It also gave me as an individual a lot of opportunity because being Native myself, I didn't necessarily have a lot of exposure within my own family to science, and I felt like Antioch was a really nice, supportive environment for supporting people and students through difficult subjects. Yeah, and so I guess I'll turn this over to Gary now.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Bucciarelli, and I currently serve as the director of field station for biological research in the Los Angeles area. We have a mountain range here called the Santa Monica Mountains, and I oversee a research program there. It's actually a unique site. It's one of 41 biological field stations spread across the state of California. It's administered by the University of California. It's actually the largest university-administered collection of field stations. It totals over 750,000 acres. And along with that appointment, I also hold a faculty position at UCLA in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I got my start outside of Antioch working with Apple Inc. I was an executive manager with them for 5 years, and I had a $40 million budget, and I was responsible for 150 direct reports. And fundamentally, the culture changed during that tenure, and I was just no longer interested in continuing with them. Our ideas about what direction this work would go didn't agree with one another, and so I just started doing a lot of exploring. And California's, unbelievable biodiversity just kind of sucked me in, and I thought, on a day trip one day to our islands off of the coast, I just thought to myself, how do I make this my job, where I can go work outside and actually do good for humanity? And for me, that connection was pursuing science and conservation specifically, and teaching in some way students so that they could understand how important scientific knowledge and literary and scientific literacy are. And so I pursued some post-bac classes. My undergraduate degree at Antioch was not in science. It was actually in interdisciplinary cultural studies, and I focused on media theory and production. And that was actually really great because it has helped me to become an effective science communicator. The path from there was really building my own sort of interest in research and working with local researchers, and then I did my PhD at UCLA in biology and have since been there as a tenured faculty and director of research. And that research is really focused on how we can address biodiversity, conservation, and climate change challenges and figure out solutions to some of the biggest challenges we face today. I'll just say that for me, where I am right now, the 3 amazing things that have impacted me through Antioch and my time there was the classroom. And at this stage of my career, I teach about 500 students in 2 classes once a year. And those 2 classes, it was clear to me that students could not communicate effectively. And so I feel like the classroom experience I had at Antioch, which encouraged debate, discussion, and critical thinking skills, was essential to me being able to succeed in science. I think the other thing that was amazing from Antioch was the way community was a central part of the campus dynamic, and learning early that you have to work with communities and collaborate effectively to create change and raise awareness. And I'll just say, for the third point, the importance of place-based research, and that was really apparent with Antioch. Being in the Glen was an incredible opportunity, but also going on co-op and working with communities and people on a specific project at a specific place was instrumental. And so I so value my time at Antioch for these reasons, and of course all of the amazing, wonderful relationships I've been able to have through the years with folks and maintained. And I just want to say thanks to the organizers for this invitation, and I appreciate all the work you've done. Thanks for the opportunity. And I believe next up is Jack. I will turn it over to him.
Thanks so much. My name is Jack. I'm from the class of 2015, and I'm currently calling in from Colorado, although I live in both Colorado and New York City now, where I currently work as an environmental attorney at Latham & Watkins. While I was at Antioch, most of my co-ops were in New York City. Two of those co-ops were at Opiate Golden LLP, which is a plaintiff side law firm focusing on workers' rights and workplace fairness. The firm was started in part by Ann Golden, who is an Antioch alum from 1967. And while I was there as a paralegal intern, I got a sense for the type of work that lawyers do, and I got to work directly with some of the firm's clients. From that experience, I decided that I really wanted to go into law. After I graduated, I ended up going back to Opiate Golden, first as a paralegal intern, and then later I got promoted to litigation paralegal. I got a lot more responsibility during that time, managing cases that involved tens of thousands of clients and collective members, and it was a really great time. I had a lot of fun. But after a bit of time working at this job, I realized that there were a lot of things that I couldn't do as a paralegal. A client or potential client would call, for example, and ask about the minimum wage in New York. And by that point, I knew the federal and New York state minimum wages by heart, but I wasn't allowed to tell them what it was because I wasn't an attorney. And often we would send documents out, and clients would call us about those documents, and I wouldn't be allowed to read what was on them, because reading or interpreting legal language for a client could be viewed as giving legal advice. So I applied for a bunch of law schools. I ultimately got into New York University, and I started attending in 2016. Although I initially wanted to do employment litigation, I learned through working with an employment law clinic and a 2017 summer internship with a different employment law firm, Epstein Becker Green, that it really wasn't for me. And then, although I had a great time in 2017 as a legal intern with Demos, a voting rights organization in New York, I was pretty sure by my second year in law school that I didn't want to do litigation at all. So for the next 2 years, I worked on learning everything that I could about project finance so that I could work on energy and infrastructure projects like solar farms and carbon sequestration projects. And then just before my second year in law school, I participated in NYU's on-campus interview program, which, by the way, is a terrifying process that every school should adopt. Basically, they had us pick 50 firms from a list of hundreds in order of our preference, and we were each matched with about half of the firms that we chose. So for me, it was about 26 or 27. We then all met in a single hotel at the same time with attorneys from each of those firms for dozens of rapid fire interviews. And if we did well in any of those initial interviews, we then were asked to go to the relevant firm's offices for additional rounds of callback interviews that could then last from 2 hours to the entire day. So it was a wild couple of weeks, but it was definitely worth it. I ended up at my top choice firm, which is Latham & Watkins. And as part of that firm's unassigned program, first year attorneys don't really specialize. So I got a chance to do a bunch of different types of work that I hadn't really considered. And in particular, I was given an assignment by the Environmental Litigation Practice Group, and I ended up finding it super interesting. I hadn't realized before then exactly how much science practicing environmental law would involve, or how much fun I would have doing it. The team was very friendly, approachable, and supportive, and since it was a very small group compared to the rest of the firm, I was able to take on a lot more responsibility than I feel like I would have been able to in any other litigation practice. So when it came to time to opt into a practice group, I stuck with that one. Right now, for most of my time, I work on environmental litigation and regulatory compliance, including things like the Superfund law and state equivalents to the Superfund law. I also advise clients on issues related to products liability, and I occasionally conduct environmental due diligence for buyers and sellers in mergers and acquisitions. My pro bono practice primarily focuses on asylum cases. We just won one, which we're really excited about. Our client is attending law school now, which is really cool. And overall, I would say that Antioch influenced my journey in a bunch of different ways, but mainly by giving me my first experiences in the legal field, which I don't think I would have had but for Antioch. And it also sort of instills in you this sort of flexibility where something happens in your professional life or in your school life, and based on that, you sort of make an entirely, like, you make an entire 180 shift in what it is that you want to do, or what you don't want to do. And I think that that type of flexibility is something that's really stuck with me and has helped me a lot in my sort of winding path through my career so far. And then finally, as a member of the first class of Antioch, now that it has reopened, I also had opportunities to develop organizational skills while I was at the college that were applicable to a lot of situations. And it made a great point of conversation with talking to admissions folks and professional recruiters as well, some of whom had been following Antioch since the closure. So overall, it was really, really great, and I wouldn't trade my Antioch experience for anything. I'm sorry, I missed who was next on the depth chart.
Soleil.
Then I will turn it over to Soleil. Thanks, everyone.
Did we use all the,
Somebody left the meeting.
did we use all of them?
No, just away. I can go there.
All right, so,
Hi, everyone. Hopefully Soleil will be back on in a second. Speaking of Soleil, I'm Chris Welter. I graduated in 2020 from Antioch. I worked as an environmental reporter at WYSO through a fellowship called Report for America. I got my start in journalism at Antioch working on The Record, which I'm sure some of you had experience with as well. Soleil and I actually worked on that together. And I also got my start in radio at Antioch. I did the Community Voices program at WYSO, which is a community radio training program. I got a scholarship to do that in my sophomore year, and I've kind of been rolling with that ever since. I wanted to go to law school. I got into law school, but I was kind of faced with this decision the spring when I was graduating, and it was right when COVID was starting. I started at YSO in June of 2020, and I thought that it would make sense to take a job. So I took that job with YSO, and I've been there over 2 years now, and it's been great. My experiences at Antioch, I studied environmental science, and so many of the classes had place-based aspects, and then that would kind of turn into assignments in the classroom. So I've been able to apply a lot of the work, the research I did at Antioch into my reporting. I've focused specifically on a lot of utility scale solar issues here in Southwest Ohio. A lot of the farmland in this area is, there's a lot of development pressure to turn it into big solar fields. So I spent all of 2021 doing long form, in-depth reporting on that, and that research started for me in some of my classes I took here at Antioch, and so I was able to apply that research into a journalism setting and communicate that to the broader public, and I ended up winning an award on that reporting last year, so that was really meaningful. And there's been many other things. I've been able to do stories on skunk cabbage that bloomed in the Glen, and I learned about that through my botany class here at Antioch. And yeah, there's just been a tremendous amount of things that I learned at Antioch, and I also working at law firms and for environmental nonprofits as my co-ops, I was able to learn water sampling skills and learn some basic things about the legal field that's been really helpful as a reporter. When the fellowship I got for this job was very competitive. The person I interviewed with, told me that my resume looked like someone who had already been, working for 5 years. So I think that really helped me, compete with people that went to big journalism schools, right, like NYU and Columbia. But I was able to show that I had relevant workplace experience, and was able to get this position. So, it's been, my job in the last 2 years has taken me all over the place. I've, gone to Houston to, look at flooding infrastructure issues there. I've gone to, Minnesota to look at PFAS contamination on tribal reservations. So I'm really grateful for the experience, my experiences at Antioch. And even though Antioch did not have a really formalized journalism program, it taught me how to write, and it also, the one real advantage of reporting on Antioch's campus is that there's real news, right? It's not like the sort of puffy stuff that you see at a lot of schools. We were constantly issues with the budget, and so it was a good training to really learn how to do journalism when you're in a small community and there's real impacts you're reporting. I mean, these are real people. You're not just doing stories about a sports game or whatever. So I've been really grateful for my experience. I've been really grateful. I've also been able to kind of help the current students who are working on the student newspaper, The Record, and I've been really happy with the journalism they've been producing as well. So I've been really grateful to become a part of the long list of Antiochians who have done incredible work in journalism and in public radio. So if you tune into WISO when you're around these next couple of days, you might hear me on air. And also I know WISO is obviously separated from the college, but I'm sure to there are some Antiochians there, so I'm sure to remind people of the history and make sure that people never forget where it started. So I'm looking forward. I hope I'll see some of you tomorrow at the funeral and procession for the old student union. I'll be there covering that since WISO's offices started there. We're there for over 30 years. So yeah.
Your name again, please?
I'm Chris Welter. Yeah, thanks.
The class of 2020.
Yeah.
So there's Soleil.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Thanks, Chris, covering for my mistakes, just like the good old days. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. My name is Soleil Sykes, class of 2018. I'm currently in Washington, D.C., as Jesse mentioned. Thank you all for hearing from us. I work for the Senate Armed Services Committee, where I'm the research assistant for the cybersecurity and personnel subcommittees. I'm from a military family, so this is an absolutely incredible opportunity, and I've loved it. I've worked on the Hill for almost 4 years now, which is wild to think about. But as has kind of been mentioned before, a co-op was a pretty important step in how I ended up where I am today. I'll never forget the co-op advisors talked about how you have the option of going wide or going deep with your co-ops, and I was able to use mine to go wide and to sort of experience and do a lot of different things related to public policy and international relations. So while I was at Antioch, I worked in DC twice. I had a co-op with an international think tank, and then my third co-op was with a human rights nonprofit here in DC. I also, as Chris alluded to, I was the co-editor of The Record for one of my co-ops, continued working on that. Shout out to Quinn and Loretta if they're there listening for resurrecting The Record. That's amazing. And then for my last co-op, I went to Brussels. I worked for the US mission to NATO, which was an incredible opportunity. And as Mackenzie had mentioned about languages in the language program at Antioch, I studied French, and so that was an enabler there. And then when I graduated, I realized that for someone who was interested in international affairs and defense policy and politics in general, that I hadn't had any experience in the legislative branch, which seemed like it might be a bit of a gap. So I applied for a fellowship with an organization called Running Start, which provides training for young women interested in politics. And I interned for a female senator in DC, and then while I was there, I had the opportunity to do this job. It was at a time of change of the chairmanship of the committee because Senator McCain had passed away. And so this opportunity popped into my lap. I was still in my fellowship, and as Jack mentioned about how co-op sort of prepares you for changes and to be flexible in all things, but also in your career, I took advantage of the opportunity that presented itself, and I've been with the committee since. I've progressed a little bit in my position, and my portfolio has changed. But that background and experience from co-op has definitely been important. The record obviously is awesome and was an incredible tool, just from a journalism perspective, but also from writing, which I've discovered is really important. The ability to write well and to be able to communicate, as Gary had mentioned, with sort of science is also pretty important and something that I learned through various experiences at Antioch. And just the opportunity to enjoy being in a place. DC is never dull, shall we say. So thank you so much for having me. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Wow. So now we come to questions. Do we have any? Okay. Robert?
Yeah, this is for Waji. Can you hear me, Waji? Uh-oh, I think she's lost. Waji, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a silly question for you.
Sure.
A burning question. I'm curious whether I interviewed you for Antioch in Calgary sometime in the 90s with your mother. Was it you?
Possibly?
I'll take that as a yes, because if you're in Saskatchewan, it's rare that you come to Calgary. Okay.
That's where I grew up.
Okay. That's just nice to see what happens to a student, potential student that you interview. And of course, I didn't expect you to contact me ever again, but it's a real pleasure to see how it worked out for you. That's all. All the best.
Roger.
Give me a fucking break.
I have a question for the gentleman who graduated the class of 2015 and then went to law school, and I'm curious how the lack of accreditation at that time impacted your situation.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that surprisingly didn't come up as often as I expected. I expected the folks that I spoke to at admissions offices and stuff like that during the law school application process to bring it up and to say, like, by the way, what's going on with this? And then I ended up having to be the one to bring it up, and then they just sort of hand-waved it. It didn't end up being an issue at all. Same thing with applying for the bar. I don't think they even noticed.
Good to hear.
Do we have anything coming on over the?
No questions online?
So all the questions are answered, so,
I have a question. I have a question for Waji, is it, the young lady who is working in medicine? Waji, you are interested in naturopathic medicine and alternative medicine. Do you combine that with allopathic medicine, or is it exclusively naturopathic?
Because of my setting, I combine them, and I sometimes incorporate naturopathic medicine. I think there's a very real place for it, especially in serving Native people. But there's been a loss of traditions, and so it's nice to, use naturopathic medicine to go back to historical context, kind of, if that makes sense. But I do standard of care most of the time. I think that there's other naturopathic medicine providers that do a lot more complementary and alternative medicine. But I do a lot of acupuncture. I do group acupuncture, using acupuncture for helping people with detox and stuff. So that's one area that I get to incorporate it more into my practice.
Mark.
Yeah, if I could follow up, could you talk about how you approach opiate use disorder, whether you use methadone, or how you might distinguish what you do from standard care?
I do not do methadone or buprenorphine because of my license. As a naturopathic physician, I'm not able to. In Oregon, I have a fuller scope of practice, and that's where I started. But there, even you can only use methadone and buprenorphine for pain. A lot of this is like super political and like really outdated, and the added 2000 waiver, the X waiver that, you know, physicians have to get to treat addiction is really outdated, and it's causing a lot of problems. But as far as like expanding access to effective treatment, so I use acupuncture in group settings with patients. I do nutrient IV therapy a lot. And then I work closely with they're called SUDPs, the addiction counselors here. I try all the other basic things. Do think that methadone and buprenorphine are extremely effective and have a real place in treatment. And I support my patients with those. I've helped people come off of them, but really the best ways for people to usually stay on them long term to prevent death from overdoses. And then, so I do kind of adjunctive care, and then I just kind of help people where they're at. Currently, we're working on doing a tribal harm reduction program here with syringe service program, and incorporating indigenous medicine into that as well. There's a few models of that in Toronto and Vancouver, where more of that indigenous harm reduction focus, which is a little bit nuanced, but really just helping people where they're at. I hope that answered your question. Yeah, I don't necessarily, there are some herbal treatments that help with opioid use disorder, but it's not utilized very much, and it's just really supportive care, if that makes sense.
So have we covered the territory pretty well?
This is great.
I'm so, Roger.
So, I'm curious how the more recent Antiochians have been doing networking with each other, with your classmates and so on in different contexts, keeping up with your classmates, possibly seeking help or offering help, providing help to your peers.
I can start on that. There was a fun one. Eric Rhodes, who is a 2016 grad and is this fall will be getting his PhD in history at Northwestern. Him and I collaborated on a story about Confederate apologism in Southwest Ohio. You know, even though Ohio was a part of the Union, in the years following the Civil War, there was a lot of Daughters of the Confederacy chapters that came all the way up to Springfield. And his research, you know, part of it was he kind of applied this idea of the 5 Ohios, how there's Southwest, Southeast, Central, Northeast, and Northwest, and how Southwest very distinctively there was a lot of Confederate apologism, largely tied to Cincinnati's economy was very tied with the slave trade in the South. And so him and I were able to collaborate on a story for WISO, and it was great because we were both able to, you know, use our skills, him as a historian and me as a journalist, and yeah, you know, the story got a lot of, I published it in the summer of 2020 when the state of Ohio decided to not ban the sale of Confederate flags at the state fair. So that was an example of networking that, you know, someone that both of us were new Antioch grads, and we were able to apply our skills together.
Great.
been here,
Stay connected. I know for sure we, our group, though Waji and I actually were often in the same dorm, not the same dorm room, but in the same dorm together. So that's, you know, these things like where we get to see one another is really essential and important. But I think one thing that's been really incredible with our years is like when there is a really major event or something. Unfortunately, we've had a couple classmates that we've lost that, you know, leveraging things like Zoom to get together and try to support one another has been something that I've been really impressed by the 2001, 2002, 2003 cohort that all came together. So that's just another way.
Going once? Going twice? Thank you.